As I say, I think if you can have external money coming into the market, that gives it the oxygen. And then once the money starts moving around, that's when the deals start to happen. And we've had over the last few years, we've had the Saudi money, we've had obviously the Newcastle investment. When you have that, that's going to make a difference. So I don't think it'll be, exactly like this, but we may be in a phase where people are more sensible. I thought, for example, in this window, people would lose their heads. And actually what's happened is the teams, it's been very easy over the years for owners of clubs to just think, just one more player. But actually, people have been very restrained this time.
And is that a good thing for the game? They have been?
Look, I think people who are big supporters of FFP generally will say that the wage deflation that appears to be in the game and the quiet transfer market is a sign of FFP working. Now, the bit that misses is that actually, as a product, we know that people love transfers.
Yes, yes.
And in terms of keeping eyeballs on the game.
Exactly.
People dream about transfers.
Yeah.
Right? It's an important element to keeping the product fresh. And, they've got to be quite careful that they don't kill the golden goose when it comes to transfers.
Yeah. I mean, myself and Kavi Solikol at Sky wrote a book about deadline day. If this window had been in it, it would have been a very short finishing chapter, I have to say. Stefan made a great point there, Ben. External money coming into the game breathes oxygen into the scene, and of course that initiates spending. I think that's virtually what you're saying. So the Saudis will be back, won't they, in the summer, Ben? And they'll be back laden with money.
Yeah, and I think it's not just about the money, it's the fact that these deals, even if they're 10, 15, 20 million, have very preferable payment terms, which allow clubs outside of Saudi, if they choose to sell to Saudi, to move in the market. And that's very helpful. Liverpool found that, Chelsea found that. So it's not just the number, it's the structure of the deal. And then if you flip it the other way, there'll be some star power that does have a massive amount of money where an overpaying takes place. And that's where Salah, 150 million to Al Ittihad, it was rejected, but maybe the Saudis come back. This time it's Al Hilal. That's where De Bruyne. You can suddenly fund an entire window, potentially off one asset that might be in their early 30s, and that may allow you to revamp with 3 or 4 players and stay within the financial rules.
Ben, we talk about winners and losers. Could you classify Jordan Henderson as a winner in this window? He got what he wanted. He got out.
Well, I think he's a winner if he makes the Euros squad. He's a loser if he doesn't make the Euros squad. And we have to look at Conor Gallagher, we have to look at Curtis Jones, because the reality is you go to Ajax and from a personal perspective, yes, he'll be glad to be out of Saudi Arabia. He can say it's a football decision, but we know that he didn't settle there. But if that first 6 months in Saudi Arabia, for whatever reason, was a great experience, but it didn't quite work out, his family were in Bahrain, the facilities were not Premier League, the team hadn't won since October, if all of that leads to a lull, a rustiness, he can go to Ajax and he can feel settled, but then if he's not picked for a final Euros, he'll still be a loser, in my view.
Ben, be honest with me, just before Alex comes in, how did the Saudis really view Henderson's departure?
Well, I think the wider Saudi deal makers were very keen on optics, which is why the day it was announced at Ajax, Steven Gerrard got a new deal. And then you can say, same club, one out, but another legend wants to stay. And it's the same club, it's the same city, and clearly there was a PR element to that. I think Henderson was respected as a professional. It wasn't one of the biggest clubs in Saudi Arabia, so there was an understanding that it was difficult for him and his family to settle. And they believe that the Saudi Pro League is able to move on even without Henderson. But if it was Benzema, or if it was another big star, like Riyad Mahrez, it might have been a slightly different story.
Interesting, isn't it?
Well, you asked the question, was he a winner or a loser? I think in terms of his reputation and his brand, and football is all about brand now, I think he's a loser. I don't think he ever really dealt with the questions around his move to Saudi Arabia, where that left his principles and those causes that he was such a great ambassador for. And he's not really answered those questions since he left either. So I think Jordan Henderson has got an awful lot to do to repair that side of his personality, and there's a lot of people who won't ever understand why he went to Saudi Arabia and for it to end so quickly. Just a couple of late deals that are going through, Jim. We mentioned the Forest goalkeeper sales. That's now been confirmed, the contract until 2027. And we shouldn't ignore the Championship. There's been a lot of big deals done in the second tier over the course of this window. Hull City have just signed their 7th player of the window. Anis Zaroury has come in on loan from Burnley. They picked up Ryan Giles as well from Luton, who's got Premier League pedigree, and Fabio Carvalho, who of course was a really exciting player when Liverpool signed him from Fulham. So keep an eye on Hull in terms of that promotion chase in the second half of the season. I
think they're 2 points or so off the playoffs. Actually, Stefan Borson, there is an owner who's come into the game and has very much fallen in love with his football club, and they have fallen in love with him, Achun Ilikali. He loves the place, and it's easy to see why the fans flock to him because of activity in this window and other things he's done in and around that place.
Yeah, the problem is if it goes wrong and they don't make promotion. You know, we all saw Rick Parry in Parliament at the committee. And there's a serious problem in the Championship as well with their version of financial fair play. And it's great to sign 7 players if you get promotion. It's not that great if you then go and fail financial fair play. Because we know that in that division, there are lots of point deductions.
Yeah.
So it's a fine balance. Of course, people love signing players. You know, we've all been there, you know, especially on some of these deadline days.
Of course. So, our Saudi expert, Ben Jacobs, is with us. Ben, I'll put it to you. You know the temperature out there, and I don't mean the heat. I mean the chat, the talk in Saudi. He's going to remain a Liverpool player, and he'll pull on the Liverpool jersey again. You know where I'm going with this. Mo Salah, after the summer window, is he gone?
I think there's more chance of him going now Jurgen Klopp's gone because it's a new era. So players, Virgil van Dijk, half hinted at it and then kind of backtracked, are going to start wondering whether now's the time. Salah's at a crossroads, Liverpool's at a crossroads. So if Klopp stayed, I think that I would have predicted he'd go to Saudi in 2025 and he'd do one more season in Europe with Liverpool. But Klopp going now might mean, especially if there's silverware, Salah goes out on a high. And then the only twist from Saudi's perspective is it won't be Al Ittihad, because Al Ittihad got preference for Salah because they are the Saudi champions and they were competing in the Club World Cup. So of course you want him to be the poster boy. Now they're 7th in the Saudi Pro League. Al Hilal are seemingly cruising to the title. So I think that the offer will now come from Al Hilal, arguably the biggest club, or one of them anyway, in Asia, rather than Al Ittihad. But the offer will still be around the same number, and that would be really difficult for Liverpool to reject, especially if a new manager is thinking, I want budget to revamp.
Sure. Out of pure interest, what likely is the offer going to end up being?
I think it'll be 100 million up front and between 25 and 50 million in bonuses.
It is remarkable, Stefan. I mean, we're talking about money. The Saudis have changed the whole scene as well. Not on this occasion, because there has been largely inactivity, but they're in and around the scene, and the summer will be different.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a little bit surprising that they weren't kind of more commercial about the spending. You know, given...
How do you mean?
Well, given that they can set the parameters by which they split the spend that Ben's spoken about, and given the distress that's out there across Europe, I would have envisaged that the plan would have been to take advantage of that and to leverage that negotiating power quite forcefully in this window, because you know teams are quite keen to sell. I think they're not keen to give players away, but they're quite keen to sell. They won't admit it, but actually quite a few teams need to sell.
Is Saudi a loophole for clubs who need to sell to get around FFP?
Well, I mean, you know, we can all have views on.
Come on, Stefan.
Well, no, it's not a loophole because they are, as we understand it, a legitimate league. They have been a successful league in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so it's not a loophole. I mean, you know, nobody is suggesting that if the Saudis come and buy a player from Liverpool, that there's any kind of relationship there or any kind of connection. So
there are, though, aren't there, when it comes to Chelsea and Saudi Arabia?
I don't think there are with Chelsea. I mean, I think that story has been debunked.
Newcastle.
But Newcastle, clearly there's a relationship, and the rules are already in place to test that. So any sale from Newcastle to any of the clubs with certainly with PIF ownership, but I think probably actually more broadly will probably end up getting tested for fair value by the Premier League. And there's a whole section in the Premier League rules about how that's done. So, you know, I think the amount of leeway that Newcastle will have to play around with that, I think will be pretty minor.
Ben, I've got a good pal of mine's a Celtic fan and a West Ham fan, and he thought that Jota was going to come out of Saudi Arabia, once of Celtic, and head to West Ham. But it fell down at the last moment. What happened with that one?
Yeah, the problem with Jota, two things. One, tax implications, because if players leave Saudi Arabia before 2 years, then they become liable for tax, and naturally they want to recoup that when they make the move. So they can terminate the contract and try and get maybe a big sign-on fee or higher wages, or alternatively they ask the buying club to shoulder the burden. So there's tax implications, and then there's wage issues as well, because at the top end, Jota was on close to 200,000 English pounds a week, and that's 40,000 more than Lucas Paquetá. So he becomes the highest paid footballer at the club, and he's only there on an 18-month loan. So that's a big challenge, and I think Jota was very intent to keep the money side and not take a big wage cut or do what Henderson did and terminate the contract. So that's why that one didn't happen. The other thing I was going to say just briefly was what Stefan mentions about the finances can be changed by a big surprise, and that's in the next year or so, there's going to be further privatisation in the Saudi Pro League. Without boring people who want to go to bed because the window's already closed, the simple way of summarising it is now PIF won't control every club, but the ministry, the government, will allow foreign investors to come into the Saudi Pro League. So PIF may have majority control over 14 clubs, not just the 4, but instead of having majority, they may allow foreign investment, which means if you're Chelsea, multi-club model, or anybody else, you might be eyeing a 25% stake in a Saudi club, and that could change the whole dynamic of the market.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app, and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.